Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Risk Demystified, what entrepreneurs need to know. My name is Michelle Eisenberg, and I am a program assistant here at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who don't know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit that is building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. So as you will see in the chat in a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So definitely make sure to check out those links and resources in the chat. And then just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, let us know where you are dialing in from in the chat. We always love to connect. And second, we are going to open up for live Q&A at the end of the event. So please make sure to submit your questions for us in that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation, and we will try our best to get to all of them. And of course, none of what we do could be possible at the center without all of the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Wells Fargo, the Nareet Foundation, Walmart.org, JP Morgan Chase, BPM, HubSpot for Startups, and Google Cloud. We are humbled by their contributions and hope you are grateful too. And so before we get started, we always like to launch just a couple polls to step back, see how everyone in the room is doing today. This first one is going to ask, how are you feeling? Fearful, anxious, surviving, or optimistic? I'll give everyone just a few moments to submit a response here. Wonderful. All right. I'm going to end this poll and share these results. Wonderful. Always great to see optimism in the lead, but do have some feelings of fear and surviving in the audience. So I'm very confident that our presentation will help address some of those feelings. So I'm going to stop sharing this poll and launch that second one. What is keeping you up at night? Finance, sales, marketing, scale, pivot, team, or surviving? And this one just helps us understand your current needs as an entrepreneur so we can ensure the programs and resources we develop are meaningful for all of you. So I'll give that just another moment. Awesome. Welcome, welcome everyone. We got folks from the DMV, San Ramon, California, Sao Paulo, Brazil, North Carolina, Pacific Northwest. Welcome, welcome. So great to have everyone here. All right, I'm gonna end these. Johnson City, Tennessee, Azerbaijan. Welcome, welcome everyone. Sonoma County, awesome. I'm gonna end this poll and share these results. All right, it looks like we got needs all across the board, but finance definitely coming up in the lead. So I'm sure we'll touch on some of that during our presentation today. And I'm gonna stop sharing this poll. And without any further delay, please join me in giving the warmest welcome to our special guest, Rosalie Ennes, Business Risk and Internal Audit Leader and founder at Portiqua Consulting. Rosalie, such a pleasure to have you here with us today. Thank you so much for joining, and I'm going to pass it right over to you.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me, Michelle. I'm excited to be here and excited to talk to you about risk and demystify a little bit of the feelings or anxious, ideas you might have of it and how you can approach it in your business. So together today, we'll talk through what risk is, why does it matter? We will define the 4 key approaches to risk. So what actions can you take when it comes to it? We will talk through some of the common pitfalls you'll face. There are obviously a lot of risks as you embark on the journey of entrepreneurship, but we'll talk through some of the common ones. And then we'll talk through a 5-part framework. So how can you make informed decisions in your business? And then we'll end it by identifying what is needed for risk-aware mindset and talk through next steps as well in that section. So with that said, hi everyone. My name is Rosalie, pronouns she, her. I have over 14 years of experience. I'm a auditor by trade. So I started off in external audit and then I moved into internal audit. And what that department or function is all about is helping companies manage their risks, helping identify them, get ahead of them as much as possible so that they can grow and succeed in whatever landscape they find themselves in. So I've worked in a mix of public, private, startups, small businesses. And so it's given me a broad lens and perspective across the business and across many different risks. So with all of that experience, I decided in 2023 to start my own consulting firm. And really my goal is to empower entrepreneurs and small business owners to get ahead of their risks, because a lot of big companies already use a risk mindset. They already have risk procedures in place, but that they're making mistakes. They're using that to mitigate some of the mistakes that they could make, but they're still making mistakes. And so my goal was to bring all of this knowledge to entrepreneurs and small businesses so that you can use risk as an enabler much earlier on and prevent that in the first place. And I'm really passionate about working with impact-driven entrepreneurs. I really want to drive change, and I want to be able to support the entrepreneurs who are building something beautiful. They want to either have a company that's good for the heart, the community, and the planet. And there's a lot of us out there. So I'm excited to support you. As far as some of my background, I graduated from Berkeley, business administration and Latin American studies. And my credentials include CPA, which I've had my entire career. And then recently, a couple of years ago, I got my CIA, which stands for Certified Internal Auditor. So not the typical CIA that you might be thinking of. And then as far as the fun stuff, I am originally from the Bay Area. I am a New Yorker now. I've been here 10 plus years and I love it. And as far as my background, I am an Ecuadorian Portuguese American, proudly. And I have a rescue dog, Kira, which you can see in one of the pictures here. So without further ado, we can go ahead and get started. And first, we'll talk about what risk is and why does it matter. So I like to start this. I know there's a lot of feelings about risks that you can have. I like to start with asking a simple question. So if I were to ask you, are you a risk manager or have you been one in the past? What would you say? And it's kind of a question to just think in your head, but I'm assuming that you are nodding your head. No, like I've never been a risk manager. I don't deal with compliance or regulation. I don't really know how to manage risk. And what I would answer to that is that we do manage risks. You're already managing risks. So we manage risks in our lives, daily in our lives. So are we looking both ways before crossing the street? We're already assessing risks. Are you buying insurance for your home? Are you driving the speed limit? Are you saying yes when your iPhone asks you to store your passwords? So these are all already a form of managing risk. So you've probably done one or all of these. So you're already managing risks daily in your life. And then we're here to talk about business. So of course you are managing risks in your business already as well. Whether you're conscious of it or not, we make those risk decisions daily. So the first risk decision you made was, hey, should I open a business? And so whether you're thinking about starting a business or you've already been in business many years, or if you're in your first 2 years in, there are risk decisions that you're making. And the first decision originally was, should you launch it? And then whether or not you are going to launch a product or a service, you have to go through an analysis before that. So you're already considering risk. And then when you're engaging with a vendor, with a partner, with anybody who you want to work with, most of the times you'll sign a contract. You'll decide whether that's the right decision for you. And so that's also a risk decision. And then last on here as an example is protect your customer data as you collect it. Most likely that's something you always want to do, and that's something you're proactively doing. And that's a form of managing risk. So now, if I were to ask you if you are a risk manager or AKA, do you manage risks? What would you say? And hopefully now you're nodding your head yes. And so you are a risk manager, and this is important, and this will kind of be to set the foundation for the rest of the presentation. So you are managing risks and you are a risk manager. So congratulations if that's a promotion title. Now you can wear another hat of risk manager. So getting into what is risk, at the simplest level, risk is really what can go wrong. So these are the challenges, the weaknesses, the fears that you have, what's keeping you up at night. So we launched the poll earlier, and whether it's finances or strategy or marketing or sales or some type of pivot that you have to encounter, these are all types of things that you have to think about, and there's risks associated with them. And so you're probably already thinking about it in one way or another, and you might have already done some exercises around managing risk. So for instance, with a SWOT analysis, you're already going through the process of identifying weaknesses and threats. And then when you do a cost benefit analysis, if you're going to make an investment or not, or go into a certain market or not, you're already evaluating risk. And then with due diligence procedures, that's another common example where you're already engaging in a form of risk analysis. So this is high level, simply what risks is. And so going a little bit deeper, risk is really all about the possibility of something bad happening. So it doesn't mean that it actually will happen, and we hope that it doesn't. And it also doesn't mean that taking the risk is bad. It just means that to achieve it, you have to face risks. And there's some inherent uncertainty with that. So most of the time, taking risks is a good thing. And if you think about it, right, no risk, no reward. Like there are risks that you're going to have to undertake. So the goal is really that you are conscious of what risks you're taking, that you're going eyes wide open, and you can make those confident, informed decisions in your entrepreneurship journey. So to recap this piece of it, risk is something, an event, a person, or occurrence that could adversely affect the achievement of your business's objectives. So we do hope that it doesn't, but the point of this is it'll help you decide what actions to take moving forward so you can achieve your business objectives and you don't want it to adversely affect you. And then risk management is really just how you go about managing those risks. So what I advocate for with Productive Consulting is for entrepreneurs to bring their risk lens much earlier on and think about it and manage risks at a certain level. Of course, as you evolve your business and as you grow, there's going to be different levels to it. You're going to take a deeper dive, but at the beginning, you're already taking on risks, so you might as well already think about it and manage and implement some form of practices of risk management. So for a second, I guess, take yourself and let yourself get a little bit overwhelmed by risk. I know that starting a business, and even for myself, as I started my business, there are so many risks that you are embarking on. You don't know if you're making the right decisions, if you should take path A or path B, if you should spend your money on one thing or go to a conference and maybe that'll give you better ROI. So these are some of the risks I've listed out that you might be thinking about. So growth, like, am I going to grow? Like, is this the right branding for the product and service that I want to have? Is it consistently being portrayed to my potential customers? And so am I converting them to buy? Am I going to get funding? That's probably something big that's on the top of our minds, whether it's a grant or whether it's investors. Like, am I pitching correctly? Finances, and I won't go through each one of these, but there's other ones here. So processes, am I establishing them right? Are they efficient? Business continuity. If something were to happen to my single warehouse, what would I do? What's my backup plan? How would I quickly pivot? And so these are just some of the risks that we have. And it's okay to sometimes let yourself get overwhelmed, but the point is that you want risks to be your friend and you want to leverage them in a positive way versus getting overwhelmed by them. So especially as an entrepreneur, it's important that you become friends with risk early on. And that's really my mission and kind of my movement, is for you to think about risks as you make your decisions, so you can grow. Before we get to the next section, there's also another, so we know we're a risk manager. There's another important piece here where there are, at a highest level, two different types of risks. So there's upside and downside. So we talked about that risks are good most of the time. So the ones you want to take are these upside risks, because they are necessary for growth, for expansion, and for you to keep your business going. And the ones you want to avoid are the downside risks. So these are the ones you want to reduce completely, or at least reduce them to a comfortable level that you feel good with. So for example, for upside risks, obviously growth and expansion, but then for downside risks, some examples of this is security incidents, or safety incidents. If you have employees, we don't want any of them. So we want to prevent it as much as possible. We don't even want, like, one or two is not acceptable. Or just social media, like getting your social media hacked or your email compromised. Like, those are risks that you want to avoid completely. All right, so with that, we've talked a little bit about risk. Hopefully I haven't scared you off yet. And I don't think I will, because now we're going to talk about what you can proactively put in place. So how can you approach risk, and what are the 4 actions that you can take? There are 4 at its core. And so this is anytime you make any decision, and if you've assessed your risks, you can accept, avoid, mitigate, or transfer. And if you like acronyms, AAMT would be the acronym. So anytime you're making a decision or taking a step in your business, you can assess your risks, and then these are the actions you can take. So we'll dive a little bit deeper into what these mean. So accept is what it sounds like. You went through the process of accepting your risks and you decided to move forward with your plan. You're like, okay, there's a risk here. Let me just move forward. So for example, with a contract, you're engaging with a new vendor and you're deciding, do I need a contract or should I just, go through with it? I don't really need to go through the bells and whistles of signing a contract and reading through it. Like I'm okay with just taking on that service or engaging with the vendor. So you've assessed your risks. You're like, okay, there's a little bit of risk there. I won't sign a contract. So I've accepted that risk. Avoid is also what it sounds like. You made this assessment and you instead decided to let go of your plan and you focus your attention elsewhere. So you're like, okay, well, I just don't want to engage with a vendor because I don't want to sign a contract. I don't have time to do it. And I don't think it's going to be the right approach. So I'm not going to sign a contract and I'm not going to even engage with a vendor. So mitigate is what usually happens. So you are going to move forward with your plan, but not before putting things in place to prepare or prevent or reduce the likelihood of that bad outcome. So in this case, you say like, yes, I want to move forward with this vendor, but I want to sign a contract that helps me protect me, set expectations, like outline roles and responsibilities, the scope of work. So you want that contract in place because a contract will help you. And it's not like foolproof. Like a contract might not include certain clauses or certain scenarios that you never even thought of, but at least will help prevent the likelihood of there being some confusion or of you not getting paid or like delay in the work. And that's why you want to mitigate your risks. And then transfer is what happens when you put it in someone else's hands. This is not as common, but it does happen. So you want to move forward, but you want the consequences and the responsibilities to kind of fall with somebody else so that they help you in terms of that risk. So this usually happens with insurance. So if you buy business insurance, it's a form of transferring the risk over to them. So it could be business insurance, could be cybersecurity insurance. This is the typical one that you'll see. And then one thing that is really important to remember is that your approach is unique to you and your risk appetite. So every business has risks. Every business needs to manage the risks, but how you manage them is up to you. So we could have people in the audience here today that are they love risk and they're like, no, I want to take on all the risks possible. Like, I don't mind, if it fails, it's all good. Like, I know there's high risk here, but I'm going to move forward. And then there might be others that are a little bit averse to risk and they're a little bit more conservative. And they're like, no, I want to have my ducks in a row. I want to protect myself. I want to take those actions that will put me in the best position to succeed and to not put my business at risk. And then there might be people who are kind of in between there. And usually most of us fall somewhere in between. But the point is that you manage those risks in a way that works for you. So you might take on some and you might not take on others. And it also will depend on the environment that you find yourself in. Sometimes maybe one year you might have said like, yes, let's take on that risk. Another year you might not have. So that also influences in terms of time. All right. So now we'll go through some of the common pitfalls you'll face if you don't address risk. And so I like to start out by saying that the three most important precious resources that you need to protect at all costs are your time, your money, and your energy. And that's what allow you to succeed. So when you don't think about risk proactively, you won't use these resources in the most optimized way. There always could be something that maybe you missed that you didn't think about because you weren't thinking about your risks. And so I've included some examples here. These aren't, obviously, this isn't an extensive list. There's so many things that could happen in your business, but these are some of the ones that I wanted to call out that I've seen as common pitfalls. So you might launch a product that doesn't have product market fit because you didn't do the right research, because the customers aren't there, the market isn't there, there's too much competition. You might run out of money, which is one of the common, unfortunately, reasons why a business might end up having to close its doors because of a cash flow management issue. Like, it's important to always have cash to keep the business running with that money. You might spin your wheels and spend your time inefficiently, which we don't want to do. So sometimes when we start a business, we have to wear all the hats because we don't have enough to outsource everything. But there are certain things that we want to assess and see, okay, maybe I should outsource this, and maybe I don't have enough time to learn how to do this. So even when I started my business, I am wearing a lot of the hats, but there are certain things that I was like, I don't want to spin my wheels with this. Like, I'm going to outsource it. So for example, like with trademarks, I outsource that to somebody who's a legal expert who could file my trademark for me and help me through that. I probably could have done it myself, but it would have taken me hours, and I would rather spend that time elsewhere. But for example, with the website, I was like, well, I can do that. So I'll take that on and I'll build out the website for now. And maybe later I would consider something else because I decided to spend those dollars on the legal trademark process. So it's making those decisions that don't spin your wheels if you're thinking about the risks. And then next up here on the second row, we have focusing on things basically that aren't priority. And sometimes we tend to avoid the uncomfortable. And so we end up focusing on things that aren't necessarily priority, that won't get the needle moving, and that aren't money generating activities. And so by thinking about your risks and kind of prioritizing, like, okay, these are the money generating activities, you can make those decisions on focusing on those and not spending time elsewhere. Another pitfall is you might present to event investors or apply for a grant unprepared. So you want to make sure that when you're presenting to your investors, you know what you're talking about, you know your numbers, you have all of the right elements in your deck. And preparing a fun pitch deck is definitely really hard, and you don't know exactly like how it's going to resonate or whatnot, but you have to have everything in there that you need. And you don't want to show up and they ask you a question and then you don't know how to answer it, or they ask you about a certain number or what's the rationale for this number and you don't have it. So the risk is that you come unprepared. And so if you're managing your risks, you will be able to present well and, put yourself in the best position possible. Because again, this is not about like you're managing your risks, everything, perfectly, you're going to get the funding. It's just that you are preparing yourself as best as possible. You might also have to find out that you have to rebrand. So one of the things, especially if you are a product-based business and your logo, your colors, like your slogan is going to be everywhere, it's knowing if somebody already owns that before you put the time and effort and energy in building it out. And then also knowing that it's protected, that once you put it out there and it has success, somebody isn't going and trying to trademark it first. So thinking about trademarks. And then the last two I pointed out here are around setting your prices too high or too low. So pricing is really, really hard as you start your journey in entrepreneurship because you don't know exactly how to price. And if you want to be premium products, if you want to be like the affordable product, you have to decide if you're going to be in which market you're going to sit in and high or low, and if you want to be high or low. And then the last one I have here is, again, money is an important resource, so you want to spend money on investments that are giving you ROI. So the pitfall that I see with entrepreneurs is sometimes they're spending money on investments that aren't giving you that ROI yet, and that also might not be priority yet. So in terms of trademarking versus branding versus building out your website, versus getting like a really fancy photo shoot done or doing like a fancy video with a production team, that those might not be like top priority for you, or they might be depending on what your business is, because again, your risk management is up to you and it's up to your risk appetite. So you want to always spend money on the investments that are going to give you ROI. All right, so these are some of the common pitfalls. Hopefully I haven't scared you too much. And then with that, we'll move into, so what can you do? So we've talked about what risk is, why it matters. We've talked about some of the common pitfalls. We've talked about a lot of the risks that you might face and that you might be thinking about. So now how can you apply a risk lens moving forward to help you, to enable you to be a good leader? So the benefits of a risk lens here is what I like to say is at the top level is confidence, protection, and resilience. So you want to be confident in all the decisions you're making. You want to protect your business so that it's around for the long term. And you also want to be resilient because things will happen. But you'll be, with the risk lens, you'll be in a much better position to be able to react to it and to quickly like pivot or do whatever you need to do so that you're putting yourself in the best position. So confidence, protection, and resilience, that's what a risk lens is going to give you. So what I like to say also is this is your secret weapon here. So this is what I'm going to present to you today. And this is what we'll go into next. So this is your secret weapon to making decisions in your business so you can grow sustainably and profitably, which are the two things that we definitely want. So the C-ARM framework is an acronym. So this will be hopefully the biggest acronym you take away from today, and we'll go through what that means. So S is for strategize. So you want to strategize what you're going to do and where to take your business. So the good news is you already do this. Whenever I introduce important frameworks, I like to start out with something that you're already doing as an entrepreneur, because then it makes it easier and you just have to add on to it versus creating something brand new. So you're already strategizing what you're going to do in your business. Where do you want to see it go? Do you want to grow? Do you want to add a new product? Do you want to implement a new system this year? What is your strategy this year? What are your top 3, 4 priorities that you're going to look at? So you're going to strategize on what you're going to do. So let's say that, taking an example, you want to grow this year. You want to double in the revenue that you've had from the previous year. So you're going to have to put things in place. That's your goal, is to grow. So S is for strategize. And then I is for identify. So identify the risks based on your strategy. So what are the risks that will prevent your business from executing on the strategy? So this is the first piece about thinking about risk. So you've already strategized. Now you're going to identify. So what could go wrong in there? And so in the simplest terms, if you want to grow, the risk is that you're not going to grow. But then what are the pieces that won't allow you to grow? So maybe you're not attending networking events. Maybe you're not attending the right conferences or expos. Maybe you're not marketing correctly, or maybe your branding needs some work so that you can grow. Maybe there's no lead generation that you have in place. So these are the things that could go wrong. And this is where you kind of just brain dump, like, okay, let me identify all the risks that are associated with my strategy. And then what you'll do next is assess. So the A of the CRM framework is to assess. So you want to assess your risks. So again, just because things could happen doesn't mean that they will, or it doesn't mean that you actually you already have things in place that will protect you. So the point of the assess, and this is a big piece of the framework, is you want to know what you're already doing. So you've strategized, you've identified the risk, and now you're going to assess it. So continuing along with the growth example, you want to grow. And so you've identified, hey, I need to attend networking events. If I don't, then I need to pivot that, right? So assessing the risk, maybe you already have 5 networking events, or you have conferences that you're attending, or you have an expo that you're going to attend. So you're like, okay, I think I'm covered there. I'm actually comfortable with that because I know I have enough networking in place. Maybe with social media, you're like, okay, yeah, I do have presence on 1 or 2 platforms, but maybe there's another one, or maybe that one's not serving me as well as I need to. So you go through that process of each factor, assessing what the risk is. Now that you've identified it, now you go through the process of assessing if you have something in place. And then once you've done the assessment, you can respond. So that's the R part. And this is where you take action. So of course you can identify, you can assess the risk, but then you have to respond in order to get it to the level that you feel comfortable with. So you're going to respond based on your assessment. So if you don't feel comfortable where you are, that's okay. You can put something in place now where so you can get to that comfort level. And if you do feel comfortable then you just move forward. You don't have to take action. So the point also is to go in eyes wide open. So as long as you're comfortable, then you move forward. And that's part of the risk management process. But if you don't feel comfortable, this is what will enable you to take action. So maybe you will add some, if you are not attending insufficient networking events, now you will add some more. Maybe if you're not active on social media, you're like, okay, I need to be active on social media now. If I need to talk to more customers because my lead pipe, or more potential customers because my pipeline for leads is now less, or it's drying out, then you need to put a plan in place to respond to that. So we have strategize, identify, assess, respond. And then last but not least, we have monitor. So this is not a set it and forget it type of activity. This is something that you'll constantly do. So it could be yearly. This doesn't have to be a very intense process that you're implementing with a system, and risk management doesn't have to be a very complex process. It's really just your mindset initially of how you're thinking and how you're approaching risks and how you're approaching thinking about risks and making decisions. So in this, once you've implemented the CRM framework, the last piece is to monitor that. So you've already thought about all of the first pieces, and then now every quarter, every year, you can go ahead and monitor those risks, because there is constant effort, because you want to make sure things are still working, and maybe your risk appetite has changed, or maybe something in the landscape has changed. And so it requires you to now pivot. Maybe the risk is higher than you had assessed initially. And so that's why you want to continuously monitor. So that's the C-ARM framework. So this is a great way to approach your decisions, and it's a great way to keep your business growing sustainably and profitably. All right, I'll let that soak in for a second. I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you. And so check the time. All right, perfect. All right, so with that, we'll go into, so how do you embed a risk-aware mindset? Because now I've given you a lot of information. We've talked about how you can approach risk, and we've talked about the C-ARM framework. So how do you move forward now? So the great news is that you already took the first step. You are here, and you've already started the process of embedding your risk-aware mindset. So the 3 key takeaways from this presentation is that you manage risk every day. And I have a little PS down there because your employees also manage risk. So even as the main entrepreneur and you're the leader of your business, as the CEO of your business, you are managing risks. There are also your employees that also make decisions on your behalf or with you, and you want them to also be aware of what they are potentially putting you in danger in, or where they are helping you manage those risks. So first, you manage risk every day. And then second, you can take one of 4 actions when it comes to risk. So you can accept, avoid, mitigate, or transfer. So AAMT. And then third, you can use the C-ARM framework to make great decisions. So we talked a lot about strategy here, and that is the first step that you can use the C-ARM framework in. There's also, anytime you're dealing with designing your processes or thinking about large scale initiatives that you have going on, you can also apply the C-ARM framework. So it's useful at basically every type of decision that you're making. All right. So you've already taken the first step. Now, what do you want to do next? So we talked a lot about strategy here, and that's because I recommend starting with your strategy. So what I would do after this is go through your strategy and brainstorm what are the risks associated with your strategy. So I don't know if you have 3 goals, 10 goals, but pick the top 3 at least, brainstorm your risks, and then apply the C-ARM framework and see where there might be gaps or where there might be pivots or some inefficiencies that maybe you can where you can change that and then put yourself in a much better place. And then 3, after you spend time with your strategy, you're applying the C-ARM framework, and now you can move forward empowered with a risk lens. And that's ultimately my goal. I want everyone to use a risk mindset to be able to make decisions and to put themselves in the best place to succeed, because the entrepreneurial journey is not an easy one, and it's filled with obstacles and challenges and times that we're up at night. But if you use a risk lens to enable you, you're going to go much, much further, and you're going to sleep much more peacefully at night. So with that, I want to thank you all for attending and to starting this journey to becoming friends with risk. And hopefully I've demystified a little bit of risk for you. I added my QR code here if you want to connect with me. LinkedIn is the best place to start. I have a whole bunch of other links, but LinkedIn is the best place. You can connect. You can send me a message. If there's anything that resonated specifically with this presentation, or if you applied the C-ARM framework, or if there's something where you're like, okay, I assessed my risks, like, and now I accepted them or I avoided it, like, let me know. Like, I love when people tell me like, yep, I assessed my risks and I moved forward, or I didn't. So love to hear those stories. And then last but not least, some of the information you heard here is going to be part of a book that I'm writing, which will be coming out hopefully by the end of this year. You can find all of the information here, and that will go much, much more in depth into specific stories about everything under the sun, from mindset to finances to strategy to processes to big transformations. And it'll deep dive into stories of what has gone wrong for people. So I'll start out with the story, and then I'll talk through lessons and takeaways. So you'll get much more from there. And this was just kind of a little slice of it. So again, thank you to NASDAQ and to Michelle and Anna. Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone for being here.
Thank you, Rosalie. Such an incredible presentation. I know risk can be an overwhelming topic for a lot of entrepreneurs, especially at this early stage. And so thank you for just making it something that's approachable. And I think the first thing that comes to mind as we start, going through these questions from the audience is, you talked a lot about how risk isn't necessarily a bad thing. And different founders may have a different appetite for risk. And so, I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts first on like the concept of risk mitigation and, whether or not that's like a mindset that benefits entrepreneurs as they're, reaching for growth opportunities.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of prioritization that has to happen. And so if you can think about risks and think about, okay, this one's a little bit higher risk and this is lower risk, like even if as I'm starting my business, I'm like, I can attend networking events that are here local in New York, or I can go to like a big conference. But in looking at my risks and the cost benefit analysis of that, it's going to cost me more time, more energy. So I want to make sure that the ROI is there. And so sometimes if it isn't, and if the risk is too high to go to a conference your first year, your second year in business, you might decide not to do that and you decide to avoid it, but you might go to the local events and that puts you feel more comfortable with that. And so you're mitigating the risk of not having that ROI by attending a more local event where it's less time, it's less money, it's less energy. And that's where you want to place your efforts, basically. So it's a whole exercise of just deciding between what you want to do, but you want to evaluate all the factors, because sometimes I find that, and it happens to me sometimes too, where you're kind of like singularly focused on what the benefit is, but you don't think about all the other impacts that potentially are also involved. So if you can have a more comprehensive view, then that'll help you make better decisions.
Awesome. Exactly. And I love how you went through that framework of how they can really identify and assess these risks, because that's going to be super helpful, something they can apply right away. Wonderful. And then we have another question here. This comes up a lot of, there's sometimes external factors outside of their controls, the economy, inflation, the pandemic, banks going out of business. These are the examples given. So how can entrepreneurs kind of leverage this framework of risk management to stay resilient in the face of these challenges?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And especially given the current landscape we're in, there are so many things outside of your control. So it's about figuring out, and I had in the presentation, one of the risks was business continuity. So it's like, where do I feel comfortable? Like, how do I create my safety net, basically? Like, do I want to have a reserve of money, or am I okay of, running month to month, or do I want to have 3 or 6 months of finances that will protect me in case something happens? And then also with inventory, like if you're a product-based business, for example, do you want to keep a lot of inventory in stock, or do you want to keep like a low balance, so that if something turns, if somebody all of a sudden the trend turns and they don't want your product, or they want it in a different size or different color, like you're not stuck with a lot of inventory. So it's thinking about what are kind of the biggest assets for you and how you can protect yourself by keeping the reserve that you need and not keeping more than that.
Yeah, really, really interesting. And I appreciate that you got to kind of give examples for both like the product perspective and a little bit the service perspective, because we have folks in both camps. And I mean, particularly with the inventory, I know that things can happen, warehouses can catch on fire, really unexpected kinds of challenges that may be out of your control. And so, being prepared for these kinds of risks is what it's all about. So wonderful. Awesome. Let's see what else we have here. And we kind of touched on this a little bit. I feel like this person is kind of, referring to the spectrum of like identifying risks. How do you identify whether something has risk or whether you don't have the confidence? I think there's an uncertainty there of like, am I just uncertain, or is this actually risky? And then on the other hand, you know understanding whether something is just risky or if it's actually like a hazard to the business, and being able to identify, oh, this isn't just a risk, this is a hazard to my business. So like where do you kind of draw the line between this terminology?
Yeah, so you touched on something important in the beginning, which was like, is this just a confidence thing? One of the things, something that alludes me to or takes me to imposter syndrome. So there is sometimes imposter syndrome that will creep in, and maybe, and I like to tell people to reframe that as it's your risk mindset kind of talking to you, and you're like, okay, like, am I confident with this? Why am I feeling these feelings of like lack of confidence? Is it because I just need a pep talk and I'm just like, all right, no, you can do this. Like, you can give this presentation, apply to this grant, you're prepared for it. Or is there some type of knowledge that you're missing? And so then if it's knowledge you're missing, go get that knowledge. Is it, and there's plenty of free resources out there like this one. You can also hire an expert if you have the funds. You can go to do like a mastermind or do a course or some type of entrepreneur program if you need the knowledge. And then sometimes it's just actions that you have to take that you haven't spent time on building out your website or building out whatever that you had on your strategy in terms of your priorities. So just, you have to kind of, I guess, identify first, like if it's a mindset issue, or if it's like a resources issue, or if it's the, like, you just need to take action and like figure out what the time is on that and like put it into your schedule.
Right. That's really interesting and definitely helpful. I think, as entrepreneurs are kind of faced with these decisions and they can kind of ask themselves these questions to understand the impact of the potential risks. So I think that's super helpful. Wonderful. Okay, so there's so much emerging technology that entrepreneurs are faced with today. Wondering, what your thoughts are on, how to kind of like assess the risk of adopting these kinds of emerging technologies for a business. Is technology right for every business, that kind of thing. So wondering what your thoughts are there as it pertains to risk.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it seems there's always a push to technology that'll help you automate and streamline and do things faster. But when you start out as an entrepreneur, implementing so many systems at once is just going to overwhelm you. So you want to have the right tools in place, and you want to think about like what, in terms of your top risks, how are you going to mitigate those with technology? And so if it's a CRM system, then go with that. If you need an accounting system to manage your accounting, go with that. But taking the accounting example a little bit deeper, if you're a service-based business and you don't have a high volume of transactions, you might not need an accounting system your first like year or two. Like, you're fine with Google Sheets. You can have something that's easier. But if you're a product-based business and you have high volume of transactions, you want to track everything really well, then you might want to implement an accounting system. So thinking about CRM, thinking about accounting system, I personally, if you want to manage your risk well, you would do that in kind of a thoughtful way and implement the ones that are high priority first, versus overwhelming yourself and then you're not implementing anything well.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of goes back to like evaluating the ROI of these
Yeah.
tools and so that really understanding which ones are bringing you that optimal value. So thank you. And we have a great question here coming through. And I think this kind of maybe they can, clarify as well, but I think this kind of pertains to like those entrepreneurs who may have like a small team that they're working with. What are your thoughts on, drawing up an action plan to prepare for risks that may be associated with the kind of business that you're running?
Yeah.
Sure that your team is also prepared.
Yeah, I would say from a team perspective, and I love that you're asking this because, like I mentioned, employees also manage risk. In meetings, as you're going along, you can do it in first in like a really informal way. So just as you're talking through decisions, action plans, like ask them what is the risk, and at least like start to help them think through what is the risk. So even just asking, the simple act of asking the question will help. And then the second thing that I found that really helps is doing what I call like a quote unquote change lab. So if there is like some big action that you're taking on or some big change that's happening in your business, spend like an hour just kind of talking through like what could go wrong? What is everything like? Is it collaboration? Are we not communicating? Is it that we picked the wrong system? And then you kind of already have those ideas and you can already brainstorm, like, how can we prevent this from happening? Like, okay, we're going to keep open communication. Okay, we're going to vet out the vendors that we have so we can choose the right system. So you're like putting those enablers much more like advanced so that you get ahead of those risks. And so, yeah, I would say ask the question, what is risk? And then do a change lab with them so that they are also, you're proactively thinking about risks and thinking about how to prevent it before you're even taking action, which can be super helpful.
Yeah, wonderful. Love this idea. Yeah, putting these systems and processes in place early on will definitely benefit, and it's never too late to start. So yeah, good time to have this conversation, and it's wonderful that you're all investing the time to be aware. So amazing, awesome. We have another question here. I think this, resonates with a lot of founders, as, loans are very common in terms of accessing capital. And so, this person is kind of wondering, like, even carrying debt, like from a loan, makes them uncomfortable. So what are some key steps for, just getting more comfortable with the idea of risk, especially for like first-time founders?
Yeah, 100%. I have some clients who do not like to carry any debt, and I have some who are like, no, just give me all the credit cards and all of the loans. I'm all right with it. I will figure it out. So that's like the different levels of the spectrum that you can see. Um, for what I've seen too is if evaluating, I guess, where you fall between that spectrum would be like the first step. Like, do you want to take on risks? Do you not? If you know you want to leverage debt, then just have a backup plan. Like that, sometimes that will get people across the hump of like, hey, I'm okay with taking on this debt because I do have savings I could pull. I don't want to, but I have that, so that it's not like I'm taking on this debt and I don't even know how I would pay this if it comes due and I have nothing. Like, because that can put you in a very scary situation and you might not be comfortable. I know I wouldn't be comfortable. So having that, again, going back to the backup plan, like if you have a backup plan, that's what gives you that comfort to move forward with that decision. So even if they're plans that you don't plan on taking, you like if you're going to take it out of your savings, if you have 401k that you could potentially draw from, you don't really want to, then you have like those levels of like, okay, I can move forward. Or if you take on, I know a lot of entrepreneurs, the biggest benefit when you start a business is if you're going to take on debt, you get a credit card, but that has 0% interest for the first year. And so that can kind of take you through where, okay, I can make all these investments. I want to make them really smart. I want to assess my risks. And then by the end of the year, I should be in a place where I could pay it off because I will be having the revenue and the sales coming in that will help me pay it off. So that's something I do encourage a lot of entrepreneurs to take advantage of, is if there are deals like that where it's 0% interest for a year, or if there's loans with really low interest, then those are the best ones to take on, because you definitely are taking on higher risk if you're taking on those loans that are super high interest, or if you're starting out with a credit card that has high interest from the start, you won't really be able to use that very well because you'll have to pay it off every month.
Yep, absolutely. That's so important. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Wonderful. We have another question here, and I think this is something that so many entrepreneurs, at various stages of business grapple with, is, how to kind of plan for long-term growth versus immediate survival, and particularly in times of crisis. And so, what are your thoughts on just kind of like that decision-making process, and like, assessing opportunities that may not benefit them immediately, but will in the long term?
Yeah, it's definitely finding the right balance for you. So there are actions that you'll take that are kind of, it's a long game. Like there's a lot of clients I would love to work with that I'm building relationships with now, but I know it's not like I'm going to have one conversation with them and all of a sudden they're signing a $50,000 contract to work with me. Like that's going to take time to build out and like have them sign on to that project. So I'm taking some of those actions, but at the same time, I'm also seeing where there's a need for certain services, certain offers. It may not be exactly how I see long term, but if I'm helping people manage risk now in a certain way, then I'm okay with like starting with that, because that's like you said, you're in the survival mode of like, okay, but I need to make money, because the truth is we need to bring in money. So it's a balance between finding those things that will have immediate reward and then the long game. And I suggest finding, like that split that works for you. You definitely don't want to tend more toward one or only toward the other, because if you're doing the short-term ones that bring in money, you might not achieve your long-term vision. And then you're going to find yourself with maybe a business that's you're surviving, but it's not what you wanted to do. It wasn't your vision. And then you might even be like unhappy with it in the end because it wasn't what you wanted to do. And if you do the long game, you might not find yourself in business because you don't have the funds anymore. So it's definitely a
Yeah.
balance. And that's where your how you manage your risks will come into play. If you manage them well, then you'll find your balance for you.
Right, absolutely. And I'm sure so much of that resonates. So it's just helpful to kind of explore those different scenarios. Thank you. Awesome. We have another question here. I think that this can really pertain to a lot of different business relationships, whether it's talking to customers, potential partners, investors, in communicating these kinds of risks, how can transparency about risks strengthen rather than weaken trust in these relationships?
In terms of like when you're presenting to investors, or can you provide a little more context?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think they're kind of asking about, either when pitching to investors, when trying to connect with potential strategic partners, or even just when trying to communicate the value of your business to customers to like build that trust and credibility. Um, you know, Customers and all of these stakeholders are very observant. And so how do you kind of, prepare in terms of like communicating that risk, responding to those individuals in a way that's meaningful?
Yeah, no, definitely. And thank you for the additional context. So for with investors, and if in the taking the example of trying to present, you want to make sure that you're talking about how you're managing risks, because for them, like that is a big risk to potentially invest in your company. And so they're already assessing, like, is this a risky investment? Do I want to take it on? Do I not? And so you want to give them that comfort that it is a good investment, and that also that you are managing risks in your business so that you can succeed, so that you can provide them the ROI that they are looking for. So you don't necessarily need to list out like, these are my top, 10 risks, and like, this is the things I'm really worried about, and like, this might not happen. Like, you don't want to give them everything in terms of that transparency, but you do want to be transparent that you are managing your risks, and that maybe like, these are the three that you see that might have impact the long-term growth, and this is how you're mitigating it. So don't just identify the risk, but also show them like, how are you mitigating it by XYZ, whatever the thing that you're doing is.
Yeah, super helpful. Absolutely. Like talking about that action that comes next, that follow through is so crucial. So absolutely, that's super helpful. Thank you. All right, I think we have time for one more question.
Great questions. I love this.
Yeah, super lively audience, so always great to see. And I think to close us out, the majority of entrepreneurs in the audience here are hoping to grow their businesses, and many of them are currently at an early stage. And so, as companies move from early stage to those later stages of growth, how, if at all, does the risk landscape kind of change, and how might their risk management strategies be impacted, if at all?
Yes, definitely impacted. It definitely will evolve. Um, it will look different at each stage. So we talked a lot about in this presentation, Risk Demystified. It's more about the high level and then kind of the strategic level. But then as you evolve, you start to go into the operations and like the processes. So thinking about how you manage your vendors, and like, is there any opportunities where there's inefficiencies in your process and how you onboard vendors, how you onboard customers, or is there any fraud potential gaps that could lead to fraud if you're giving your employees like too much access to a certain system that you're using as part of your vendor management, as part of making payments. So you start to kind of drill down into different layers, and then there are other risks that come up. So there's like the strategic level, but then there's the operational level and like and each individual process level. And then you start to add different layers to it. And then that's where you can have a bigger team helping you manage risk. You can bring on someone or bring on a team to help you manage. You can implement a system, but I always like advocate for not starting out too crazy and just starting out at a level that you're comfortable with at the strategic level. And then you can kind of dig in as you evolve.
Love it, Rosalie. This has been such an incredible presentation and conversation. If you had just one key takeaway or piece of wisdom you wanted to leave with the audience, what would that be?
The biggest takeaway of this presentation is that I want you to become friends with risk. And I hope by the end of this, you are more comfortable with it. You're not as scared of it. You're not as avoidant of it. And yeah, I would love for everyone to know that they can become friends with risk and it can enable their business.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to our community and share your insights. Such a great overview. And on behalf of the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center and everyone here today, we are just so thankful that you joined us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Wonderful. And to our audience, we would love for you to join us again for upcoming webinars, which you can view using those links that are going to be posted in the chat. And thank you all so much for joining us today. We look forward to welcoming you back online with us soon.